let me burst some of your bubbles as we get started. Number one, Christmas Day is basically a random day that's been picked to celebrate the birth of Jesus, the 25th of December. There's no evidence whatsoever to support Jesus being born on this day or even at this time of year. The closest thing to evidence that we have is an ancient theological position that Jesus had to have been conceived on the same day that he was killed. There's nothing biblical about that. It is just an assumption that people had. And as it turns out, December the 25th is exactly 9 months after the time of the year when he was crucified. So that's one of the reasons why that was picked. But there's no biblical evidence for that whatsoever. It's very possible, in fact, even likely, that Jesus was born in the autumn, probably around September time. But we can't know for certain. To pick one day out of 365 and assume that was the day Jesus was born are pretty long odds. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't celebrate his birth on the 25th of December, since we have no idea what day it was. It's as good a day as any. Number two, Jesus may or may not have been born at night. What? But all the songs. The shepherds were greeted at night, and they were told that Jesus had been born that day. Most likely earlier in the day. It probably wasn't God's intent that those shepherds be there while Jesus was being born. He probably had at least a little bit more respect for Mary than that. So chances are Jesus had been born much earlier in the day. And then the shepherds were told that night. Number three, and I know you know this, but it's hard for our heads to get around this. Jesus was born in very primitive and very non-sterile circumstances. He was born in a barn or a cave that was used to shelter animals. Chances are, contrary to what we normally think of, the animals would not probably have been in there at the time. They probably would have been shooed out. Even an innkeeper who said, yeah, okay, you can go have that space, would have had enough respect for a pregnant woman to shoo the animals out. She probably wasn't in a stall with a donkey and with sheep and a little lamb sitting there watching. He was born probably with only Mary and Joseph present, although some of Joseph's family may have been there. They lived in Bethlehem. For whatever reason, there was no room for them to stay with family or to stay anywhere else because the city was over full due to the taxation that was going on. But some of them may have been there to help. We also know that the circumstances were not necessarily favorable to reputation, because here's Mary and Joseph who haven't been officially married. Mary's having a baby. Chances are a good bunch of the family didn't want anything to do with it. But there may have been somebody there to help Mary. After all, childbirth was not easier 2,000 years ago than it is now. It was probably much more difficult. He was born to no fanfare, not like normal births, even at that time. There was nobody to announce it. There was no baby shower going on. The Magi would have come later. Almost certainly they weren't there at the beginning. Mary and Joseph leave after 8 days, according to Matthew 2. They went up and got Jesus, went through the circumcision, and then they fled to Egypt. When did the Magi come? Certainly not that night. The earliest they may have been there would have been the end of the week, probably, most likely, according to the context of the passages, they saw him when he was several years old, 2 or 3 years old. He was blessed in Jerusalem by a man called Simeon. And that's all we know about him. Isn't that amazing? Wouldn't you love to know Simeon's story? He was praised by an old woman called Anna after his circumcision. And that's all we know about her. And of the events that happened around Jesus' birth, very little else is known, except what I've just told you. Of the events between his birth and his 12th birthday, almost nothing is known. Mary and Joseph leave. They flee to Egypt. Herod kills all the children in the region. After Herod has died, and it's safe for them to return, Mary and Joseph came back. He would have been 2 or 3 years old by this time. They returned to Nazareth, not to Bethlehem. And it's there that Jesus is raised, which is why he's called Jesus of Nazareth, even though he was born in Bethlehem. What we do know is they return every year to Jerusalem at Passover. And that's it. That's all we know about Jesus until he shows up when he's nearly 30 years old to be baptized.